India, I'm Ram. Out of the blue, Reserve Bank of India has increased the repo rate by 40 basis points. The repo rate now is 4.40%. And to discuss the impact of this decision, long-term and short-term impacts on commoners, on housing, on loans, and on various businesses, I'm sitting with financial advisor Panna Bhandari and tax consultant Yash, Shah. So welcome Panna to Vibes of India.
Thank you for having me.
So Panna, we recently saw that out of the blue, Reserve Bank of India increased the basis point to 40%. Like by 40%, what do you think? How will the commoners get affected by this decision?
The RBI has recently increased rates from 4%, the repo rate from 4% to 4.4%.
Yeah.
So
40 basis points.
Points, yes. And usually the RBI takes interest rate decisions bi-monthly. And the last meeting that happened was in April, and the next one was due in June. But this is an unexpected surprise rate hike by RBI. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? What was it?
No, how will it impact the commoners?
Okay. So what RBI is trying to do is it's trying to balance between growth and inflation. Okay, so for the commoners, if you are a borrower, so if you have taken a loan, if you're paying EMIs or any borrowing that you have done from a bank or an NBFC or any other institute, your interest rate has basically risen. So suppose you were paying X, it is now X plus this 0.4 and plus whatever the bank increases for you. So of course you're paying a higher interest on anything that you're borrowing on. For the commoner who is investing, this actually works out in your favor because earlier you were getting a certain X% for your deposit that you make with the bank, and now the bank will pay you higher because the interest rates have risen.
Yeah. So these are the effects.
Yes.
So another thing that's going to get more expensive is housing, is loans. What are the other things that are going to get expensive due to this decision by RBI?
Right. So, as I think Panna said, this decision was taken by the RBI unexpectedly before its June MPC meeting. First of all, I think I would like to compliment the RBI for doing this because it takes a lot of guts to, first of all, introspect and assess this situation that we have a problem. Though we are much better placed than the other countries because the difference between the real interest rates and the inflation is quite narrow in India as you compare to the world. So say for example the interest rates in US and the inflation rate in US, the gap is very big. The gap is not as big as we are seeing it in countries like US and Europe. In India we have still a manageable gap of the real interest rates and the inflation. So what is happening today? Today your deposits fetch say 4% or 4.5% or anywhere depending on the banks it can fetch up to 5.5 to 6% also. But the inflation is around 7.5 and 8%. So you are actually losing 2 rupees on every rupee, 100 rupee invested. So this is the problem in India right now, and inflation hurts the poor the most. So what RBI wanted to do was it wanted to see and ensure that inflation does not hurt the growth prospects. India is a growing country, growing economy, and an emerging economy. So RBI decided that okay, it's the time is enough. The last time they increased the rates was somewhere around in 2018, Panna, somewhere in 2018.
Yeah, August 2018.
August 2018 was, so for 4 years, it had not increased the rates. Obviously, we had conditions like the pandemic and everything in between, where they had to in fact decrease the rates. So, decrease in rates spurs the growth, and increase in rates push down the growth. So, RBI had this battle of growth versus inflation, and it had to balance. Unless otherwise, if they would have not increased these rates, inflation would have killed the growth.
Okay.
So RBI,
catch-22 situation.
yes,
for
absolutely.
RBI.
So RBI assessed this situation in middle of the LIC IPO. It came in between, which is really commendable because this would have hurt the LIC prospects also, the IPO prospects also. But without fearing all of those, they came with an unexpected announcement, and they increased the repo rate by 40 basis points, and which means that the repo rate basically is the repurchasing option. So what happens is that the banks will have to pay 40.40% extra to the RBI for all the funds that have been taken by the RBI. So the cost of funds for the banks is going to increase, which obviously they will have to pass on to the customers. So the customer who's paying, say, an X interest, will have to pay that much extra, which now because the banks have to pay to the RBI. Not necessarily that all the banks will pass on the cost. It's like, you can see it and visualize them as any other company. The company, some will pass on the cost, some might not, and the timing of passing on will also be vary from banks to banks and from their financial position. So some banks have today itself. Yesterday the rate hike was announced, and today itself few of the banks have passed on, but few of them have not yet passed on. So depending on each bank's individual financial position, they will do this thing. However, the in my opinion, this thing RBI came in with an unexpected announcement yesterday was twofold. First of all, they wanted to be ahead of the curve because there was a Fed meeting also, which was scheduled yesterday in America, which was today early morning for us, and there was a lot of skepticism that they would raise anywhere between 0.50 and points up to high as 0.75. So if they would have raised, say, 0.75, we would not want to be just following Fed. So they came before that and announced to the investors that, okay, this is the problem that we are having, we have to address this problem. And it addressed in a rightful manner, which, so if something needs to be cured, it has to be cured, and the dosage has to be given, it has to be given. And I think the RBI did that yesterday. So a very good move, a very bold move, and much required, according to me.
Yes, when you said that it was a very good move, so in the last committee meeting, the retail inflation was somewhere more than 6%. And currently, if we see that for a commoner, the prices of, say, petrol or cooking gas or cooking oil, everything is increasing. Do you think that increasing the repo rate was the only way out for RBI?
So, Janvi, if you see, the largest propellant of inflation was food inflation in India, at least. The food prices have really shot up, and that is hurting most sections of the Indian population. India, I still believe, is a capital-starved country, and the optimal solution is not to curtail the capital. We somehow have to manage the supply-led solutions. So this is a double hit problem the world is facing right now. It's not only demand-led inflation; it is supply shortage inflation also. And if somehow, so say for example, because of the Russia-Ukraine war, the wheat and the wheat supply has really gone for a toss.
Oil.
Oil, a lot of things. So somehow, uh, if we can focus on the supply-led solutions, the only problem with supply-led solutions, it doesn't happen anything overnight. It takes a lot of investments, a lot of time for that to fructify. And I think, in my opinion, government is doing a lot of things, such as the PLI. Government has introduced the PLI to decrease the dependence on China. A lot of the inflation reasoning is China's supply chain is totally broken. So government is trying to address that as well. But that is not a very short term. Nothing is going to yield in the short term. It's a longer term solution. But I still feel that curtailing capital and not making it available, making it more expensive, will hurt India in the short term.
But when we say that we will get the benefits in the long run, what do you see is the tenure like? When can we
so
see
with this, so the schemes like PLI they have introduced in different sectors. The investment cycle normally will run for another 18 to 24 months. And I think post that period is when I think the supply chain will drastically improve.
Okay.
That's my
So yeah. In the shorter run, like people will suffer.
people. Yes, absolutely.
So there was a question you had, like what about home buyers,
Yeah.
right? So up until now, we've seen like probably the lowest interest rates for home buyers. If you see in the pandemic, there was like this absolute massive wave in the real estate sector. People wanted to get loans, buy new places, and the prices have skyrocketed. And because of inflation, like he said, all your steel and cement,
prices of raw materials increased.
Yeah, they did. So when you say, what is the repo rate impact on home buyers? So if you are a new home buyer, I would personally recommend please go and get your loan ASAP, because I think that the interest rates are going to go up further.
Okay.
And if you are
houses are going to be more expensive.
Yes, so the loans are going to get more expensive, right? If you are an old home buyer who has a loan running and EMI running, I would recommend that you try and pay off your EMIs quicker if that's a possibility for you. Because if the interest rates are going to go up, and if you have a floating interest rate with the bank, which typically is the case in a home loan because it's a longer duration loan, then you should try and pay it up sooner, because if you keep at it, and if the interest rates keep going up, then your EMIs are just going to increase down the line.
This is the time to buy it.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I don't think it's too late. It's just the start of the interest rate cycle, and you're seeing this global trend where all interest rates all across the world are going to like increase, and inflation is here to stay. It's not transitionary as they were trying to tell us.
At least in the short
time.
It's not moving.
Yeah. So I mean, I would suggest that you either pay off your EMIs if you're in the middle of the loan payment, or if you're a new home buyer who's looking to buy a house on a loan, don't put it off till next year. Take it today. Yeah, that's what I would recommend.
And Panna, like housing is going to get expensive in the future. Taking loans is going to get expensive. But which businesses will benefit from this decision?
So I think for all businesses that are borrowing, this is kind of like a short-term setback.
Okay.
Because if you see, like he said, some banks might choose to absorb some of this interest rate increase. Some may pass it on to their consumers. So anybody who's any business that is essentially lending, like a bank or an NBFC, might have a slight decrease in customers, who are wanting, because everybody thinks, oh, I should have borrowed earlier. But nobody's thinking, oh, the interest rates are going to go up higher, so I should borrow now. But the tendency for a consumer is to think, oh, the interest rates have risen, I don't want to borrow anymore. Or I might postpone my purchase, or I might just stall it, not buy it, end up buying. And anything that, any business that essentially has customers where they are buying, where they're taking loans to buy their products. For example, automobiles, you take a loan on your vehicle, you take a loan on your house. People tend to kind of postpone or perhaps just cancel the decision and interest rates start moving up. So all these businesses also see an impact in their sales. That happens. And not just the high value items, even the durable consumer goods, suppose you're buying your washing machine or your laptops on EMIs, that also kind of starts stalling. People start becoming more conscious of the increased EMIs. And I mean, as crazy, I've seen people do like hair extensions on EMI. So, all that kind of, all your luxuries basically start going out of the window as interest rates start going up.
So it's going to sooner or later affect.
Absolutely. And then the demand side sets in. So like he said, right now the supply side is causing the pressure on inflation. And that's what, that's why all the prices are going up, because supply side is seeing all these price hikes and discontinued production from China and all of that. What happens is this cycle eventually starts moving to the consumer side, where the interest rates become so high that the consumer says, I don't want to buy anything that is luxurious, I just want to stick to my basic necessity. That is way down the cycle, way down the cycle, but that's essentially how the cycle changes.
And Yash, to add to this, like when everything is getting expensive, last month, just in April, the income tax collection, like the tax collection was one of the highest. Do you see a long-term impact or a short-term impact on tax collection also when things are getting costlier?
Yeah, so I would agree to Panna that this is the rate increase as cycle has just begun. 0.40 or 0.50 what they've increased right now is very very minuscule in comparison to
Where we've been in the past.
where we've been in the past and where we need to be to actually see
Control
inflation tapering down. So we just at the beginning of the cycle. I don't think this. So in my opinion, the the rates where at a which is at an inflection point that will change the consumer mindset to stop purchasing is still far away from that. Though they will certainly be more cautious and more watchful in what they spend now on, which may lead to deferment of certain purchases. Uh, so that we still, I mean, that will begin, but we're still far off from.
Still like 1 or 2 years to go for that, essentially. But for a person who's already sitting on a loan, I mean, we would agree that
Absolutely. So
start prepaying it.
So absolutely. So I think there is where the important principle of floating rate and fixed rate of loans also comes. So say for example the home loans. You know what? Practically, Janvi, what happens is whenever I go and take a loan right now. So if I've made up my mind I want to purchase a house today. I go to the bank. I'm very well aware of the fact that okay the rates are going to go up. The bank gives me two options in a practical manner. One is if you go for a floating rate or a fixed rate. But you know the gap between the floating rate and fixed rate is so high that none. I mean, me, you, or anybody, we are never going to opt for a fixed rate. The fixed rate gap is 2-3% higher than what is going on. So we are always going to be कि आज में क्यों इतना ज़्यादा करो. So whenever that time will come, we'll see it that time. So nobody takes the fixed. So practically everyone goes for a floating, and years down the line, this rate will keep on increasing. So this is definitely going to be a dampener for home buyers, as in when the banks pass on these rates to the consumers. Absolutely. So, and as she said that if you see the last 2 years data itself, you know the reduction in the housing rate interest and some states like Maharashtra where they waived off the stamp duty, there was an absolute boom in real estate built up properties. You see Gurgaon, see where NCR, there were years and years the property sales had not moved. There was highest ever piled up inventory. Everything got sold off because of the lower interest rate regime and some state governments deciding to waive off stamp duties. We are again now, the cycle has reversed from yesterday, and from now on we can only expect these rates to further
increase.
straight up.
And yes, on one side, RBI is trying to control inflation by increasing the repo rate, and on the other side, CBDT has proposed a list of 28 items, which includes everything from say jaggery to bags or shoes. And what they're planning to do is they are trying to impose a common GST slab on all these items. So all these items are going to be expensive in the near future. So from day-to-day items to the luxury items. So how do you see that? Like earlier, they were trying to do this for textile, putting everything in a single tax slab because it's easy to calculate the taxes. So now the GST is increased. The decision is not passed yet. But what do you think?
No, so
do you think this is contradictory, or you think it's
no? This is there is a practical problem also. When you have a lower GST rate, what happens is it becomes an inverted duty structure. What does that mean is that my output is say on 5%, and whatever I'm consuming is on say 18% or 28% or something like that. That leaves me with two kinds of problems. In certain products, the government does not allow a set off. The biggest advantage of GST was whatever I procure and whatever GST I pay on my inputs, I get an offset against my output GST liability. But if my GST output liability is at a lesser rate and all my inwards, my consumption is at a higher rate, I have this problem of inverted duty structure. So either that GST balance will be with me. So that's a problem. Like for example, a lot of real estate players have this problem because their output is at 1%. And they don't get all the input credits. Some builders opt for a 5% output rate. So we have an issue in that. So the government is in a way trying to address that we have a common rate for all the GST items, and if you see in most of the Western countries, the concept is the same. You don't have differential rates. It is one common rate for most of the items. So I think we are moving on that line. That is not a problem, but of course that will also be uh, uh, causing pressure on the inflation, because that will eventually be costlier for the final consumer. So that is definitely a problem. But from an industry point of view, I think it is also required.
It's required.
Yeah.
And this for both of you, like on one side when the repo rate is increasing, GST is increasing, and the salary slabs are constant. They are not increasing. So in such a situation, what would you advise to commoner or people who are viewing us? What do you think is the best way out for maybe saving more or maybe investing better? Any suggestions?
Right.
So, when you're saying that inflation is at 7%, and your bank FD is giving you 5.5%, and then you are also paying taxes on this, and the things that you want to buy from this are increasing at the rate of 7% inflation, then really you're just sitting on a negative yield, right? So, the investor, even though maybe his risk appetite does not allow, he's pushed to start investing in equities if he wants to keep up with the inflation. That's the reality. That's the hard reality of it.
Fixed deposit won't help.
I mean, it does. Of course, you have to gauge your own risk appetite and the time period for which you are investing. But essentially, this does mean that if interest rates they have been this low for all this while, and in fact now the cycle has reversed. So now I'm happy that people who want to put money into fixed deposits will start seeing higher rates in the next 8 to 12 months or something. But yes, it basically means that if you account for inflation, and if you account for the fact that your fixed income or safe instruments are just paying you 4.5-5%, you're making a negative yield. That means you have to move into higher growth assets if you really want your money to, in real sense, to grow, and that means investing in equities.
Interesting.
Totally agree. I think have your asset allocations in place. So we tend to see a lot of, especially salary class and people who generate fixed returns. Mindset is towards generating fixed returns only.
Okay.
So they are the people who invest, and the elderly, they are the people who invest more in the fixed income products. If you are one of them, then you will have to have equities as a part of your asset class investments and have asset allocation in place. So probably if you have say 100 rupees investable surplus, and right now most of it is in fixed income products, you would definitely want to think about moving 30 to 40% in equities, so as to match your returns is to equal to higher to the inflation.
Okay.
So we keep your asset allocations in place.
Yeah, and like he said, if you want to move 30-40% of your total corpus into equities, you can do this over a period of time. You don't need to take the entire chunk and put it in one go, and the market goes boom, and you're like in an unhappy place. So just space it out, and that should take care of essentially everything. So asset allocation, start your SIPs, do it over average out your buying price. You should be okay, and invest for the longer term, of course, if you're doing it in interest rate.
And just to conclude, I mean, when RBI came with this unexpected move, the decision was criticized. But just as a concluding note, what would you say that this decision is going to be helpful in the future, and you think that is right?
I think anything that the poor RBI does is criticized only. But you see, essentially, if your food prices are as high as they have become, and if you see like coal, cement, oil prices going up 50-70%. If they don't do this, you are essentially anyways getting hammered as a consumer. You are not recognized. Here you just hold the RBI responsible. Oh, you are doing this to me. But
because we don't understand the long-term impact.
We don't understand. We're not seeing the bigger picture. But if RBI had not done this, we would have actually fallen behind the curve of the global reserve banks, who have already started tightening since 4-5 months back.
Okay.
So yeah.
Absolutely. So the biggest drawback, if the RBI would not have done this, we would have seen the impact on the Indian rupee.
Okay.
Indian
It
rupee,
would have fallen even
so
more.
we are essentially a country which is dependent on imports because oil is our biggest importing commodity, and it's getting costlier by the day because of the war. We already have petrol and diesel and all at sky life high prices. So any further depreciation in rupee would have really hurt us. Would have really hurt us as a nation and to our economy. So I think, and as I mentioned earlier, that if we would have waited for Fed and a lot of other countries to do this before the June 8th meeting, then I think we would have really fallen behind the curve. So rupee would have taken real hammering before that. So I think it's a absolute required move and a timely move that RBI has done.
I think we'll understand the benefits in the long run.
Yes, absolutely.
But
Because yeah.
I mean, you were
No, that's
please. But thank you so much, Panna and Yash, for sharing your insights on this very crucial topic. And for more such interviews, for more such stories, keep watching Vibes of India. Thank you.
Thank you.